to Iowa City's Other News. We're live here on March 8th, 2003. We're coming to you from an undisclosed location, although safe, we're told, somewhere on Lafayette Street here in Iowa City, Iowa. And today we have a great show for you. The title of the show is Religion, Peacemaker or Warmonger. So one of the main topics is the effect of religion on peace and war and the unfolding events that are going on today. We'll have several guests for you today. First of all, in the first half, when we do talk about religion, specifically we'll be talking with Pastor Dee Lundberg. She's the pastor at the Faith United Church of Christ here in Iowa City. She's also the current president of the Consultation of Religious Communities in the area. We'll also have Andy Douglas today. He's a nonfiction writing, I believe, student at the University of Iowa, and he also kind of specializes in Eastern spirituality type religions. So we'll get some input from him as well. In the second half of the show, we'll be talking with other members of the collective, including Adam Burke and Stephen Canner. We'll be talking with them also about religion, war and peace, but also about other issues that are affecting us, both locally and nationally, such as municipally owned utilities, contrasting that with the for-profit corporate utility companies. Now, by way of introduction to the Religion, War, and Peace segment, I just want to take a moment to review some of the events that have been taking place earlier this week. Of course, George Bush went before the nation and the world the other evening, primetime live, to essentially prepare us for war. It was ostensibly a press conference with questions, but I viewed it more as a way of preparing the nation and the entire world for a war. And essentially he wants to press the members of the Security Council of the United Nations to vote on a new resolution, or on enacting a resolution that will allow for us to go to war, basically declaring that Iraq is not meeting their the supposed goals of total disarmament. And some of the favorite phrases of George Bush that we hear are, you're either with or against us. Basically, he wants these nations, as he said, to show their cards and how they feel about Iraq and Saddam. And essentially, that means that he's dividing a bright line. You're with us or against us. And whether or not that harkens back to, biblical, good and evil, it's clear that George Bush has this, a lot of religious undertones to what he's saying and how he's supporting his viewpoint that we need to go in and, as he calls it, disarm Iraq, as I call it, murder and annihilate a great population. So we have here Andy Douglas and Dee. I guess I'll go with you, Dee, first, if I can call you Dee.
You, please.
Okay. What do you think of when you hear, George Bush, our supposed president of our country, using this religious rhetoric to try to support, basically a war on Iraq?
It makes me crazy. It saddens me greatly that he would use my faith tradition in particular to try and justify his actions when so many of the Christian community and other faith traditions are not behind this. And he chooses to be very selective, as I'm sure I do, in my arguments for not going to war. He is very selective in his arguments, religious arguments, to go to war. And his main supporters are the more fundamentalist strain of the Christian tradition. The Southern Baptists he's been touting as one of his supporters. When Jimmy Carter recently left the Southern Baptist tradition because they decided, oh gosh, I guess about 3 years ago now, that they were not going to allow women to be ordained anymore. Is this the kind of Christianity we want the country, what kind of agendas do we want to support?
That's very telling as far as where
Bush
is coming from.
Yeah. And so I believe strongly in the separation of church and state, and that these decisions shouldn't be made on a religious basis. Of course, it is our faith. It's a very emotional issue for a lot of folks. It's a very powerful tool, but to prostitute, in my estimation, the faith for his agenda is highly inappropriate, highly offensive to many of us, and does not belong on the table in that way. It's the same kind of zealot behavior that we saw in bin Laden. And I know I'll make some enemies for that statement, but
that's a fair analogy.
You
Depends
know,
on your
I
point
mean,
of view.
it's that
what part
same
of the world you're living in.
Yeah, it's that same thing that saddens so many of my Muslim friends, that someone would act supposedly on behalf of their faith that they love dearly and is, you know, deep in their bones, and to have somebody make it this ugly thing for their own purposes, and to smokescreen the real agendas, as far as I'm concerned, of oil and strategic locations in the Middle East. Most of the wars that have been religious haven't really been religious wars. I've thought about the question a lot. You know, there are exceptions, certainly. Crusades, the Inquisition, ugly chapters in the Christian history. You know,
And perhaps the religion is a smokescreen, you're saying, for other underlying issues, but they're trying to invoke the name of God.
Sure, it's a powerful tool to get people on board.
Right.
Who wants to be against God? I mean, first we don't want to be unpatriotic. Now we don't want to be,
Heavens
you know.
forbid. Right. No pun intended.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Okay, well, maybe I'll have Andy, if you want to give your input from the maybe Eastern religion perspective or spirituality. I mean, how do you feel when you hear George Bush invoking, you know, religion as war?
Like Dee, I feel outraged and saddened. I guess coming from a perspective, from an Eastern meditation practice in which the goal is to develop within ourselves a certain sense of compassion and connection to other people. I feel, I try to make a distinction between that spiritual growth and religiosity, which can just be a kind of dogmatic belief. And I think that's what George Bush is relying on. He's talking the talk, and he really bases a lot of his policy on these so-called Christian ideas, but I don't think that they really go down to a level of deeper spirituality. I think that Christianity is a very rich religion, and there's a very long, traditional, contemplative, mystical strain to it, which I'm very interested as someone coming from an Eastern religious perspective. So I would say that he's not respecting the human nature of the Iraqi people. He's not seeing those people over there with a compassionate heart, which, if I thought he was a really spiritual man, I think that would be the kind of approach he would take. He's motivated, I think, not by spirituality, but by more dogmatic socio-political concerns.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to be rolling a videotape in a little bit. We've done some street interviews, just kind of talked to some folks a couple weeks ago, and I can't remember the exact questions, but we'll see from the tape.
Okay.
Just ask some people out in the street how they feel about religion, how it's affecting war, et cetera, peace, and the events that are going on in the nation. So if we want to go ahead and roll the tape, and if you want to watch.
Do you think that religion has helped to advance more the cause of peace or war?
No.
In this current situation?
In general.
In general, I think it really depends on the situation. I think in times it has advanced the cause of war, and I think at other times it has helped. It seems that in this particular situation, a lot of local groups have been fairly active against the war, and so I'd imagine, at least in this case, that it's been helpful against the case of war. But I think it really depends on the situation.
And do you think the religious clergy should serve as pastors in the military?
Should serve as pastors in the military? Oh, goodness. I think it would be a very difficult thing to do, but at the moment I can't think of a reason why they shouldn't. I think it would be a very difficult thing to do as a clergy person. But I think if there's some administering to do, that would be a place to be, I would imagine. Because I imagine there's people that are involved in this that perhaps aren't sure why they are where they are and whether or not they're doing the right thing, and perhaps a pastor could speak to that and bring them, help them work through some of that. I'm not sure. I guess it's
It's a tough question. And if you're comfortable
Okay.
answering this, it's fine if you're not. But what religious affiliation are you or were you raised in?
Okay, I was raised United Church of Christ. I have pastors in my family. I guess I'd consider myself agnostic at this point.
Okay. Well, thank you. And
Okay, we're back with Iowa City's Other News. Just had a chance to see the clip, and kind of hard for us to hear it for a few minutes in here. But I think one of the questions had to do with if pastors, should be going perhaps overseas or whatever to give, I guess, spiritual advice or whatnot to servicemen. That it's almost a rhetorical question, but I guess I'll ask you first, Dee, if you were, and maybe you have been asked to talk to families who have men or women going into the service, what kind of, I guess, guidance or thoughts would you give to these people, knowing that they might have some of their own, ambivalence in their mind about, why they might be going?
Boy, that's a hard question. That's a really tough question. If they have within themselves made the decision that they want to go, then I guess the best I could do is counsel them in how to continue the discernment process of where they might draw the line if they had to draw the line with an action, how to care for oneself in such a situation, how to, if you indeed end up being face-to-face with civilians, how you might treat them ethically, compassionately, that there's always time for that. It's never too late for that, even on the spot. If a kid wanted to go to Canada right now, I'd drive them too. It is their choice, and my job is to not try and impose my belief system on them, but to accompany them even when they go to places that I don't agree with. It's not my job, in my view of how Christianity or any religion goes, to convince people of my position.
Okay.
You're either with me or you're not.
Right, exactly. Okay. Now, how about you, Andy? What if a serviceman, came to you and with a situation, they said, what if all of a sudden I'm out there on the battlefield and, it's me or the other person, and, he just might want some guidance. I think in the past it's been, a lot of people have been more, so to speak, black and white in the military. It seemed that, good guys, bad guys. But I think with, Eastern religions and just, global awareness, and we're all part of the human race, people are having a little different take on that. What advice, if any, could you give to that very difficult situation? I'm not sure I can fill someone else.
Yeah. I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Okay, sorry, it's tough.
I am heartened by seeing a number of veterans of foreign wars coming out in opposition to this war. And I think you're right that things are not as black and white as this administration wants to paint them. So I guess I would just encourage such a person to look within themselves and sort of recognize the common humanity that they have, and not to think rationally and not simply buy into the patriotic argument that the administration is buying, but again try and make that connection. It's a very difficult situation, I can imagine, if you're going overseas to fight. But I would always encourage someone to look at their own conscience. And
Okay. Okay, thank you. And what we're going to take a look at now, earlier, I believe it was February 17th, was an ecumenical peace service that took place kind of around that big weekend time when all across the world there were just huge protests. So one of our collective, went out and took some footage of that, and why don't we go ahead and take a look, and then we can have some comments on that too.
Right.
So if you can go ahead and roll the tape when you have a second.
How can that happen? It can happen as we raise our voices together tonight in song. It can happen as we speak in our homes and in our schools and our places of work to those who may not be quite convinced. We must not be silent when we are called to speak for peace.
I bring this statement from the American Baptist Churches, USA.
That have been drafted by the leaders of the United Church of Christ and
from the United Methodist Council of Bishops,
Christian Church Disciples of Christ. We of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America.
the Mennonite Central Committee
of the Episcopal Church of the United States.
I speak from the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops.
General Assembly Council of the Presbyterian Church USA in September of last year. We urge Presbyterians to oppose a precipitate U.S. attack on Iraq. We call upon President George W. Bush and other leaders to refrain from language that labels certain individuals and nations as evil and others as good, and oppose ethnic and religious stereotyping. To allow United Nations inspections in Iraq without undue pressure or threats, and to end economic sanctions against Iraq.
Lead us from death to life, from falsehood to truth. Lead us from despair to hope, from hate to love, from war to peace. Let peace fill our hearts, our world, our universe. Amen.
Dee and Andy, and since I have gone with you the first couple times, Dee, maybe I'll let Andy put you on the spot.
great.
Just to get your impressions of what you saw. Basically, we saw, church leader, or what have you, leaders of various faith, boom, 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 each of them supporting, caution and, let's not rush to war. We have to consider the.
And those were actually denominational statements from 10 different denominations, from our leaders
Representing a
nationally.
Right, okay, great, yes. And is there a Eastern religion, spirituality perspective on war, or is that just like not even a concept for?
Well, I mean, when you say Eastern religions, there are a lot of
Right,
different
I
perspectives and a
understand.
lot of different traditions. Of course, nonviolence is a strong ethic in a lot of Eastern practices or approaches.
Can you imagine a leader of a country?
Absolutely, I can. Oh, I'm sorry. What
Or
were
of
you gonna
another,
say?
of a country with an Eastern religion. Can you imagine a leader being like George Bush is now, using this?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
Unfortunately.
power is, in order to get into a position of power, people
Right.
often leave behind their ethical
Right,
precepts, unfortunately.
okay.
But I'm heartened. I think, in addition, I'm very impressed by these different denominations coming out in opposition. And I know that the Dalai Lama is also very much a pro-peace person, and I have other friends who are in different practices, Zen, et cetera. And everyone I talk to is against this war. So I think it's a broad, not simply Christian, but a very broad opposition.
Right. We're talking about literally billions of people in the world with
Perhaps.
against, no doubt, with
Mhm.
the combined religions, of course.
Mhm.
So, and I thought, Dee, that there was something that you wanted to comment about as you were watching the tape.
Well, in particular, the United Methodist Church, which both Bush and Cheney are members of, have attempted to meet with Bush and Cheney several times, and they're flat refusing to do so.
Right.
They just don't even want to hear it. And it's hard to, and I'm speaking not as a Methodist, you know, so I can't fully put myself in a Methodist person's position, but that's going to be really difficult to have someone that shares your faith tradition, that is essentially turning to other faith traditions for his rationale, and won't even work within his own.
Right.
Won't even. I guess I would have thought politically he would have met with them and then blown them off.
Right.
You know, he didn't even do that.
Right.
So I feel particularly sad for their position in this.
Right.
Yeah.
So what is a person, that's people out there who are maybe agnostic or trying to decide, you know, what religion, if any religion, they might want to become involved with? I mean, what would, you know, either one of you say to a person, you know, given that there are these, you know, diametrically opposed things going on? You have this huge segment of the religious leaders in the world, you know, saying slow down, halt, and then you have, you know, George Bush and, you know, presumably several people behind him. And both, you know, sides presumably grabbing from the same text of, you know, the Bible in the case of Christians and whatnot. You know, drawing from the same text to support such opposed points of view. I mean, what do you say to people who might be struggling, wondering, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to think?
Yeah. Well, it's a serious question, and I think it's a question that folks need to be about answering. I am much more of the mind of preparing for this with, not with duct tape and plastic, but with getting right with God, the God of your understanding, whatever that means. And I think that for me, one of the primary functions and values of religion and religious groups is the sense of community. As a member of the United Church of Christ, I can't sit here and say that every United Church of Christ church across the country feels the same way I do. It is probably the most liberal of the mainline denominations, Christian denominations. But you've got to shop. You know, that may sound silly, but some people have very deep roots as Catholics or Mormons or whatever. But you got to shop around and find a group of people that you feel can support your specific needs. The UCC, there's a joke that it stands for Unitarians Considering Christ, because we're kind of, especially, I think faith represents it well, the church I pastor at, that there's a wide range of what we believe about, you know, virgin births and resurrections and stuff like that. And what brings us together is the permission to be searching and to not have all the answers. Once you have all the answers, you don't need God, you don't need church anymore, you are God, which is my fear of where Mr. Bush is headed.
Right. I would have to agree with that. I have great concerns when I read about when he was running, when he thought about running for president back in '99. He told a group of pastors that he had a calling to run for a higher office.
And they did a laying out of hands.
Concerns me, yes. So, but
Yeah.
do you have any parting comments, Andy, before we move on to the next segment? I mean, what would you want to say to George Bush if you had the chance to give him some words of advice from a different perspective?
And remember, you're on
Get
TV.
out of town.
Get out of town. No.
I would, he has said that he places a high value on human life, and I would ask him to put his money where his mouth is, because I think he's drawing distinctions between the value of American life and the value of lives of other people. Mm-hmm. And from my perspective, human life is human life, and there are too many artificial distinctions drawn, whether by religion, by politics, by nationalism. So I would ask him to really consider the lives of the children of Iraq and put his Christian espousal of beliefs, put his money where his mouth is.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I was at a rally in D.C. back in January, and there was a sign that somebody said, all it said is, "They are people too." And I thought that said it all. So
Yeah.
You're right, thank you. Yeah. So, well, thank you very much, Dee
Thanks.
and Andy, for coming on this segment of our
Thank you.
show. A lot of good thoughts about our George Bush and where we're going, and hopefully we can have a turnout. Hopefully he's listening to us so we can start thinking about the people of the world, the people of Iraq, in a different light. So now we're going to be moving on. We're going to show a tape before we move on to the next segment of our show. Starting out with the rolling a tape from the anti-war rally here in Iowa City back on February 15th. I think that's the tape we're going to show, featuring the radical cheerleaders from Iowa City. So why don't you go ahead and roll it.
So we just, they're over us. We're out of here.
Okay, thanks a lot.
The New York Times will say it's 10, or maybe it's circling that paper, but we'll see.
5, 6, 7, 8. War! Iraq! We ain't down with that! War! Iraq! We ain't down with that! So what's that they say? No, we won't go away! There's a problem here, no lot to fear! War! Iraq! We ain't down with that! War! Iraq! We ain't down with that! Denying medicine!
Punishing children! Starving a nation!
Won't be Hussein's obliteration! So you say, war! Iraq! We ain't down with that! War! Iraq! We ain't down with that! War! Iraq! We ain't down with that! Louder! War! Iraq! We ain't down with that! War!
While our faith communities and
Back here today with Iowa City's Other News on March 8th, 2003, talking about 1999 a few minutes ago. We're back here to talk more about religion, war and peace, and a couple other issues having to do with municipally owned utilities, et cetera. A lot's been going on the last several weeks, even here in Iowa City. The Iowa City Council is considering various ordinances or actions regarding both anti-war statements and municipally owned utilities, contrasting that with Mid-America, for example. And we also actually, Dennis Kucinich, I just want to mention this while I'm thinking of it, candidate for president. He's also a representative from Ohio. He is in town today, March 8th. He should be at the Iowa City Public Library, I believe, at 1:30, was on the website this morning. So I think he'll be talking about cities, how they play a part in peace, how it's basically peace is a local and global aspect. So if you have time and want to meet with Mr. Kucinich, find out his views, feel free to go down there today. I have here with me two other members of the collective, Adam Burke and Stephen Canner. Hello, welcome to the show. I know you've been working behind the scenes the first half of the show. I guess I just ask each of you, Adam, if you haven't, and then Stephen, if you have any comments or perspectives on what was talked about earlier with war, peace, religion,
It
George
was
Bush.
a very interesting discussion. I'd like to thank those people for coming on our show. It was
Yes.
great. It was good to have them. I heard something on the radio last night about George Bush, that he thinks, and you guys talked a little bit about this, that God is on his side. And apparently they have, in the White House, every meeting is a prayer meeting. So they start every single, if they're talking about the budget, they pray. If they're talking about going to war, they pray to go to war, or they pray that their God is on their side. And that to me is a little bit frightening, that such a heavy reliance on prayer and sending up prayers to heaven, that hopefully God is on our side, or praying that he's on our side, or assuming that God is on America's side or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Kind of freaks me out. Yeah.
A little
Jump
bit.
in.
Well, it's that manifest destiny
Mhm.
that we all learned about, and which is kind of scary, and I think has guided the U.S. to a certain extent, and is still guiding it. And sad to say, it guides many other nations and cultures across the globe. You hear it in the Middle East from a number of different countries and players there, and you hear it in the United States. I look forward to, in a few minutes, we're going to talk more about City Council's reaction to some of the anti-war activity. But what struck me about the conversation earlier was the statements by the different denominations that came out against a war. Actually, it seems to me most mainstream religious organizations, the national organizations, have pretty progressive platforms in regards to all peace, justice, and environmental issues. And so one has to wonder, if that's happening on the national level, what's wrong? Why do we elect people like George Bush? We've been doing it for 200 years. I don't think he's an exception to the case. The story's been going on for the 200 years here. It goes on at the local level. We have a majority that seems to be pretty conservative and not ready to move to the next progressive level. So how do we transform that national movement, at least within the religious community, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, other religions, to a grassroots kind of movement? I think that's our challenge as progressive people, to find out how to do that.
Right, and part of that might tie into what we're hoping to talk about March 22nd on our show. I think about
right.
media, the corporate media, the influence they have, because education is the key for people to be able to, find out about the issues, the reality of the issues that they're looking at. But we're kind of spoon-fed what the corporate media wants us to hear, and and just like in
it's propaganda,
right? Propaganda. Yeah. I mean, I look at Newsweek. I get Newsweek, although I won't anymore. And inside the article about Bush and God, there are negative things. There are criticisms of Bush and how he thinks he's doing God's will. But on the front cover, you have Bush and God in this solemn picture. So the quick and easy thing that everyone is seeing seems to portray that in a positive light. So that's of concern, just how it's portrayed by the media. You have another?
Well, I was just going to say that I'm encouraged. There's religious people such as Dennis Kucinich, who is Catholic, and he doesn't wear his religion on his sleeve, but I think he comes from a strong moral Catholic ethic background, if that makes sense. And that's what motivates him, and cause for peace and justice. And so he's been acting in Congress and for most of his life to work in this area of making life better for people around him. That's his tradition. And it's encouraging to see. I'm excited about his candidacy. I'm from Cleveland, and I first heard of him when he was mayor and when he saved municipal electric, and it's motivated me, I think, a lot in what I try to do, to see what he did in Cleveland.
Right. Okay.
So
we're going to be
rolling
a tape of him in a minute, and actually we'll have a tape later of the discussion by City Council about municipal electric issues. But first, I think the video on Kucinich now more has to do with wealth and poverty, and how poor people sometimes are viewed by the conservatives as budget busting people. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at that if that's the right one we have.
About the priorities of this country. I need to share a story with you. The other day, I had an amendment on the floor of the House to restore full funding for temporary assistance for needy families and to make it possible for families, particularly women, who are on their own and have young children, to have an opportunity to regain their economic independence, to make sure they're able to get credit for work, to make sure that they can children. And here we are, prepared to spend up to $1 trillion on a war, on an unjust war, to spend $1 trillion in tax cuts for the rich, and the leader of the other party came to the floor of Congress and condemned the effort to try to help poor women and children and budget busting big government. Give me a break. Amen, brother. Give me a break.
Amen. Give me a break. I love that cut. I mean, and he puts it right on the head. He's saying, no one ever talks about, well, Bush never talks about how this war that is impending is just going to take billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars. And yeah, we can't even, help the people in our country get health care or get off welfare, help child care, education. So why don't I go ahead and, I know since you're a big fan, I guess I'll let you go again if that's okay, Stephen, just to comment on what you just saw from the representative.
Well, what hit me is he talks about what's budget busting, and when we spend on a federal level close to 50% of the discretionary funds that's available for Congress on military uses, it's spread out through a lot of different accounts. In fact, I heard Dennis at that talk there, and he talked, there's 1,800 different financial accounts that the Pentagon has. So you got money going in and out, in and out. No one seems to be concerned about that. No one seems to be concerned about the rising cost of our military spending as budget busting. The door is always open on that. We're the biggest arms sellers in the world now. I just saw statistics that said that all that we've spent on the military since World War II is equal to everything that we've produced in the country since that time. I think it's about $1.5 trillion. It's just mind-boggling.
Okay.
Wow.
Today,
yeah, the only thing I wonder about Kucinich, and you mentioned he's Catholic, and I'm sure that's why he is anti-choice, because of his strong religious beliefs, and that is my concern with this candidate as a presidential candidate, that he said he won't overturn it by appointing a judge, but he has voted so many times anti-choice, and now I've heard he's starting to become a little bit hazy in his rhetoric that he will allow certain amounts of choice, but I think that's my biggest knock on this candidate, is that he's an anti-choice candidate. What do you know about that?
Well, do we have time for me to respond?
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead. And then we'll...
Karen Covey, former council member, director of Emmett Goldman, was at one of these meetings with Kucinich. Senator Joe Bolcom was there, and they both asked questions about this issue, as did others, because that's a major concern among progressives. And I think he's realized, for whatever reason, it could be for political expediency's sake, just like George Wallace said, I have to get the black vote, and he turned around and became an anti-segregationalist. Kucinich is saying, I need to get the progressive vote. That's going to be my base. And he said he's going to be, he doesn't use the word pro-choice, but he's going to support Roe v. Wade. He's not going to appoint a Supreme Court justice that's going to overturn Roe v. Wade. And he said he's going to vote for federal funding of abortions. So I think at this time, I'm willing to, since he's so good on all the other issues, I'm willing to take his word. But the test case will come when there's votes coming up. They might have a vote on so-called partial birth abortions and whether that's allowed.
In the House.
In the House, the U.S. House. And if he votes the correct way, in the pro-choice way, which I think we want to see, that will be the test. And I take him at his word that he's had a conversion. He's seen that it's, even though personally he has trouble with it, and he's wrestled with it, that's what's come out. he's going to support a pro-choice position.
Okay.
And there'll be more discussion, I'm sure, this afternoon on the March 8th at 1:30 at the library if people want to talk more about that.
Right, exactly. Now we're going to go and roll a tape that actually has to do with another issue that Dennis Kucinich is big on, and that's the municipal electricity owned. You know what I mean? Anyhow, City Council here in Iowa City.
It's a mouthful.
Right, yes. Talked about it recently, so why don't we take a look at the tape?
Let me quickly, for you and for the public, thank you for this decision, for allowing an opportunity to meet to protect Iowa City businesses and residents from historically high electric rates. And as we've pointed out in our presentations before you in the past, Iowa City small businesses and residents pay respectively at least 32% and 28% more per month than the average paid by their counterparts in 137 municipal utilities in the state of Iowa.
I think the council, however, has overlooked what I think is a very obvious initial step, in that it would take very little time, I think, to put together an inquiry as to what the initial cost of a municipal utilities would be. And if I'm accurate in what I understand, that to purchase the infrastructure from Mid-American would be at least in the neighborhood of $50 million, if not closer to $80 million.
I have a chart here with me tonight that indicates the rates for the electric residential prices for Mid-American Energy since 1986. Prices have been very stable. Mid-American is adamantly opposed to any effort because it is not in the best interest of our company, of our employees, and most importantly, of our customers. The reason there has been no There is a reason there has been no municipalities formed in over a quarter of a century. In the end, the Public Power Initiative will fail. The question is, at what cost?
Can you assure us that your organization is not going to introduce a bill at the state level to limit the ability to form municipal utilities this year?
I will assure you that our association is not going to introduce legislation that was referred to by the council. I think you referred to Missouri legislation, which is actually entering into condemnation proceedings. But we do not have an interest and will not be introducing that.
Whether we should continue with Mid-America Energy in its present form, or whether we should consider the prospect of a municipally owned utility company. It's interesting that it arouses so much interest that we have a series of out-of-city speakers coming to tell us what we should not do for our community. And it is also interesting that whatever Mid-America may like, one thing it does not care for is competition, that many cities, 137 in Iowa, do it and do it well. What is it that those cities and communities can do that we in Iowa City could not do if we chose to go for it? Thank you for funding the feasibility study so that we may have an informed and intelligent discussion in the months ahead.
Okay, we're back live on March 8th, 2003 with Iowa City's Other News with Public Access TV. We're here today back again with Adam Burke and Stephen Cantor. And in a moment we're going to be watching another video of another portion of the City Council meeting that has to do with the anti-war resolution that's being talked about. But first, if I can just get a brief comment from each of you about the video that we just watched.
I think Jim LaRue hit it on the head when we have these out-of-towners coming to Iowa City to tell us what to think about Mid-American. I think we can make up our own minds. And once we hear the results of this report, I'm sure we'll hear that it's going to save Iowa City money to run its own power. And hopefully they will include, and Steve pointed out Terry Smith, who had the bar graph there and is also a representative of Mid-American. He's on the Iowa City Telecommunications Commission. Hopefully they will include in that municipal power municipal cable, and we can get rid of our cable company, who I won't mention by name.
Okay. Steve?
No, don't say it.
Maybe Stephen will mention it in his comments.
Yeah, communities across Iowa do have municipal cable. They pay much lower rates. They have good quality TV that's presented. Iowa City looked at that option. Whoa, there goes our sign. Things are falling down here, but we're going to carry on in any case. I think the possibilities are outstanding for what we can do for economic development in this community with the municipal electric utility. I think we're going to save 10 to 30%. The study's going to show we can save 10 to 30% on residential, also for some commercial, industrial, you tend not to save a lot. And that money, millions of dollars possibly, instead of going to Warren Buffett, who owns Mid-American, he's a multi-billionaire. I think he's number 2 on the list behind Bill Gates.
Wow.
It stays in Iowa City, it circulates. So we don't have trickle-down economics, we have grassroots, fair economics. Thanks, Greg, for fixing our sign there.
Just set it, set it on the ground. No.
And the other thing I wanted to say quickly was that Mid-American brought in about 30 people. They brought in their union members, IBEW, Local 109, and they brought in other office managerial types. I think they put the workers in a hard place. There's pressure for them to support Mid-American.
Right. And Iowa City could hire those workers, couldn't they? It's not like we're going to lose jobs.
Exactly.
We're going to need more people to run the Iowa City Power, yeah.
And they're in demand. I think they're going to get a good salary. But there were a lot of half-truths put out by the presentations. Terry Smith said that rates have stayed level, when in fact the Iowa Consumers Council said they should have been going down. Right. So they're making tons of money when the rates should have been even lower than they are. They should have been much lower. Bob Elliott, conservative supporter of such issues of First Avenue extension, who maybe will be running for city council the next time around. He talked about these outlandish prices, 50, 75 million. He says we should wait we should do some initial things first before the study. Well, this is the initial thing. As Adam said, we're going to find out what it might cost to buy the distribution system. It could cost 25 million, but it's going to get repaid with people paying their residential electric rates, which hopefully will be lower than they're paying now. And we have local control, and we can do some good things.
Okay, well, great. Yeah, we'll have to see if we can have a repeat of Kucinich in Cleveland back when he saved the utility company there. Anyhow, we're going to move on to another video of the Iowa City Council. This one is when the discussion centers around the proposal to have Iowa City enact an anti-war resolution. And there's at least one other city, I think more than one in Iowa. Other city, Des Moines and perhaps Decorah, I'm not sure, but Des Moines definitely has already enacted a resolution anti-war, so we should hope that Iowa City, liberalist of liberal, could do the same. Let's watch a tape of the city council meeting.
As of February 16, 93 U.S. cities and counties have passed anti-war resolutions. This number is growing every day. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. To adopt the proposed solution is such a step.
Mr. Mayor and council members, my name is Maureen Connolly. I'm an Iowa City physician and resident, the medical director of the Iowa City Free Medical Clinic, and I'm also speaking as the co-coordinator of the Iowa Physicians for Social Responsibility. On behalf of the latter group, I ask that you please put on your agenda the resolution which has been discussed so that it may be subjected to the true democratic process.
Can I make a quick procedural
Good evening.
suggestion?
Just a moment, yes.
This may or may not eliminate the need of some of the speakers to speak tonight. Could we take a straw poll to see if there are 3 people that would be willing at this time to put it on the agenda for March 11th?
Well, I guess I would poll the council. I honestly believe there is not a person on this council who would not like to see this crisis in Iraq be solved peaceably. I mean, if there's anybody in the council who disagrees with that, let them speak. Are there 3 people who feel this is the purview of a council to discuss this? We do not have 3. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Tarek Abouisa. I'm a 5th grade student at Shimmick Elementary. I'd like to recite a few quotes about peace. Peace through strength is much less effective than strength through peace. If war were effective, all of our problems would have been solved thousands of years ago.
Pardon?
It's not in the name of terrorism, it's in the name of cash.
Okay, now let someone else,
That's what it's
please.
for.
Please, let's.
My job calls for promoting tolerance for diversity, teaching nonviolent problem-solving skills, and making responsible choices. Again, your decision to put this on the table will make my job easier. As a teacher, I'm asking you to consider the price children will pay for this war, locally, nationally, and abroad, and urge you to join more than 90 local governments nationwide in supporting this important resolution.
You know, I certainly don't want you to think I was laughing at you at all. I was actually looking back 35 years to the vigor and commitment of a lot of myself and my peers in the Vietnam War. It was not laughing at you at all, believe me. I am going to ask the council if they would consider a pro-peaceful resolution.
Can we disagree with anything anybody has said tonight? I mean, absolutely. My frustration is that there's not a thing I can do about it.
Okay, let's do it.
We have 3. What goes on work station? Anything else? Mike?
We're back. Thanks to those citizens of Iowa City who went before City Council and spoke their minds. It saddens me to hear the mayor say, I'd like to do something about it, but there's not a thing I can do about it.
Was he being applauded for not being able to do anything about it?
I'm not sure. I hope not.
I couldn't tell on the tape there.
I mean, it's kind of like George Bush saying, oh, all those anti-war protesters, they're not going to have an effect on me. You know, it's not going to change my mind. Kind of the message is, you know, don't bother, because I'm not going to change my mind. It's like the mayor has given in to this, like, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah, I know the mayor is not in charge of any defense or troops or anything like that, right? I don't know what his point, his point is lost on me, whatever he's trying to say.
Right.
It's ridiculous. Anyway, sorry.
That's okay.
Well, no, the argument that they were, that the majority was making, and this has been a consistent majority on City Council through the years, I think, is that this is not connected to local issues. And I think it was eloquently made by speaker after speaker, the connection that was made. 100 billion minimum cost is what's being thrown out there, and that's hundreds of dollars for each Iowa person. That federal money that could be used for public transit, for housing, that we're losing. It's going down, and that's the major connection. Plus, life's lost from Iowa citizens, Iowa City citizens, and people in Iraq citizens. So the connection is there. I think it was strongly made. We do have a reason to pass an anti-war resolution. We've done things in national and regional scope before that didn't directly affect us. We passed a resolution in support of the bottle bill, which we don't have control, a statewide bottle bill to make it stronger. Ross Wilburn and others on J.C. Cogs passed a resolution to support Amtrak's railroad program to come through here. That doesn't have direct effect on us, but it does have an effect in the same way an anti-war resolution does. So I think we can do better. It was inspiring to see folks come there, and I hope they come again this Tuesday and speak out, and we'll keep fighting in a peaceful way to stop the war and future wars.
Okay, so that'll be Tuesday, March 11th, is that right?
March 11th, people are welcome to come to public discussion. I felt, quite frankly, that the council and the mayor were quite rude. People came and he kept saying, I'm going to cut you off and there's not time for you. And we need to listen to people who come to city council. That's our job, to do that.
Good.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Now we're going to move on to the next segment of our show. We're trying to start up a new Where's the Outrage segment. And today we have Jamal River here. He's outraged today, and has been, about the development in Hickory Hill Park, the proposed development situation going on there. So why don't we let Jamal show his outrage and tell the people how he feels.
Thanks, Teresa. Yeah, I want to talk about the perpetual destruction of Hickory Hill Park. And I'm guessing a lot of you out there are familiar with Hickory Hill Park. It's an expanse of wooded trails that's located on the north side of town. There's lots of fields and ravines, lots of different animal and plant species live there. It's by far my favorite area in Iowa City, and I think that it's a lot of other people's as well. And for years now, Hickory Hill has been chipped away at on all sides by housing developments, roads, more recently by the expansion of Oakland Cemetery. It's just been developed on all sides, and I think it's a terrible thing that the only wooded park in Iowa City can't be better protected. As some of you probably know, there's an area of hills and fields that myself and many others believe to be part of Hickory Hill, but which apparently belongs to the owner of the Press Citizen, and it's been subdivided and it's currently having houses built on it. And just all around the park, people are just constantly buying up the land and bulldozing it so they can put up another 12-bedroom, 6-car garage mansion that's overlooking what's left of the woods, or at least overlooking it until someone buys up the space behind their house and bulldozes the next acre of land. I just think it's a really sad trend, and unfortunately, the encroaching development isn't even close to being the extent of the problem. The entire park is constantly threatened by both overuse and bumbling incompetence. An example of the latter being that over the past year or so, a construction company has been grading miles of trails into slushy gravel in an attempt to make them wheelchair accessible. And I think that maybe if they'd done a decent job, or even a halfway decent job on like a small area of trails, that this might have been a plan that would have worked, but instead they have spent and are continuing to spend thousands upon thousands of the Iowa City people's dollars just laying down miles of totally useless powdery gravel and huge heaps of dirt, and leaving the park just torn up into muddy, vegetationless muck in the process. Hickory Hill is, to my knowledge, Iowa City's only expanse of wooded public land, and it's being ravaged not only by money-hungry developers and urban sprawl, but by our own tax dollars, and nobody's being held accountable for it. So that's my outrage.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jamal.
Cool.
Yes, very good points, all good points. Well, we have to wrap up, unfortunately, now. We could all talk forever about some of these issues that are very important to all of us. This is Iowa City's Other News. We will be rebroadcast this coming Wednesday night at 9:30 p.m. So please join us if you can then, too. And I'd like to thank all the guests that came today, Dee Lundberg earlier, as well as Andy Douglas, I believe, and members of our collective here. And before I sign off, just leave you with a thought that I've been having, that basically that Bush saying that Iraq will become a democracy kind of sounds like a dictator imposing democracy on others, which to me is an irony. We're only 4 to 5% of the world's population in the United States, and we're just imposing ourselves. And that's of a real concern to me, and I would imagine the other 95% of the world. So thanks for watching today.
I have another ironic quote if we have time. You can roll credits over me, over the top of me if you want to.
But, roll the credits and hear from
I read
Adam.
in this little newspaper, it's called USA Today, that Bush's quote, "You're either with us or you're against us," is actually attributed originally to Lenin, the founder of the Soviet Union, which is just irony of ironies to me, that Bush would use a quote from Lenin to further his cause. And anyway, just wanted to get that out. Just so people know where, when he says that, where he's coming from. He's coming from Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Right?
I wonder if he knows that.
I don't know. Yeah.
And maybe Stephen, while we're running the credits,
oh yeah, you
plug
have your
plug a neat book. See if we can try to get that.
Show that
What's
to the
called
camera.
Addicted to War. See if we can.
Addicted to War, and by Joel Andreas, just came out last year. It talks about the U.S. imperialism and our addiction to militarism through. We're going over here to this camera.
Oh, other camera.
Oh, we're going here. Okay, back here. I'm sorry. There we go. And talks. It's a great book that gives that history. We're attacking everywhere. It's shameful. It's shameful, and it's time to stop that behavior.
Okay. Thank you very much. Feel free to call us at 339-7260 in case you want to join us or have comments. Thanks for watching.
We welcome your comments.
Bush's war has got to go!